When Daggerheart came out, I was really excited but also kind of worried because games aren't very cheap. But when I found out I could purchase the online version and print out my own cards, it was perfect. But then I was thinking, but what would I do with all the cards when I'm not playing? And that's when the idea came out. I wanted to build a box. What would be the point if I saved money on the game but spent a ton of money on the box? So that's when I decided to challenge myself. I was going to use a wooden block game from the dollar store and an old leather bag from the second-hand store. The problem? I've never worked with wood and I've never worked with leather, so
I wanted to make my box look like a book. And I was planning the project. The first thing I noticed was that the front and the back covers were way too thick. I needed to cut them by half. But that shouldn't be a big problem because, hey, I do have a jigsaw.
Okay, plan B. Let's do it manually. Fun!
Now I know it seems like I didn't want to do it at first, but that was before I realized how much of a nightmare this is. At a rate of 20 minutes per cube, this was taking forever.
I did it! I mean, it took about 2 weeks and I'm never gonna saw anything ever in my life.
The next thing I did was cut slits at the sides of each piece so they would glue together better.
Okay, so now I'm ready to start gluing. If it ever comes out. I haven't used this glue for a while. Come on! Okay, it's time to ask for help.
With a little help from my partner, I was back on track. The next step, put on glue. Then realized I needed something to prevent the pieces from sticking to the table. Then pressed together for 6 minutes. I sanded out the big bumps created by the saw with my fake cheap Dremel tool and proceeded to smooth out the wood by hand because the tool was making the surface uneven.
This is about as much sanding as I can take at this point.
But as I was testing the results of my hard work, I realized I missed something. These parts needed to be flattened out before gluing.
Finally, all the boring stuff were over and now I can get a little creative. Now, I want my box to have storage space on one side, but on the other side, I want it to be free rolling dice space. And that's my canvas. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to print out the Daggerheart logo
and place it in a box on top of a piece of carbon paper. Then I trace the lines. Now that I have the design in place, I want to carve along the lines to give the image depth. First, I'm going to try to do it with a wood burner.
That's when I realized it wasn't creating the effect I wanted. Mainly because, well, it's a wood burner and not, say, a carving machine. So I pulled out my carving machine.
The reason I haven't used it from the get-go was that it's so loud and it vibrates so hard I need both hands to even try to control it. Once that was done, I filled the crevices with glue and gently placed some gold leaves. By the way, these are not real gold.
The next thing I wanted to do was stain the wood to make it look like a fine piece of wood and not like the dollar store abomination that it was. But once I saw the prices of wood stain in my not so friendly local store, I looked for an alternative solution. And when I say that, I mean I asked ChatGPT what he thought.
And it suggested I mix oil paint with linseed oil. First, I tried it on a leftover piece of wood and I thought it looked kinda good, so I applied it on the inside of the project. The outside was going to be covered with leather, and applying stuff on it before gluing leather might just harm the effectiveness of the glue. I used it the same way I would use wood stain. First I brushed it on, and after a few minutes I wiped the excess off. Once it was dry, I used my knife to carve lines along the sides to create the illusion of pages, and then I painted it the same way, only this time I mixed yellow ochre and white with linseed oil. I don't know what it's like to work with new leather, but what I do know is that this leather was about to crumble, being so old and very, very dry. So I gave it a little spa day by rubbing it with coconut oil every few hours until it couldn't absorb anymore. Then I realized the pieces were not big enough to cover my box, so I had to improvise. This was when I decided to have the pieces of leather overlaps each other. This design allowed me to glue 2 straps of leather in between to make a belt-like fastening for the box. I used some leftover leather on the inside of the cover, which left me with exposed wood on the top and the bottom. I solved this problem with some more fake gold leaf. I cut out a buckle from an old shoe and attached it to another leftover piece and glued it to the back strap. I also used the metal rings of that same shoe and a regular desk punch on the front strap, and now my book closes really nicely.
Next, I needed to find a way to secure the cards in place that is also gonna be beautiful. My first idea was make them out of clay because that's what I had at home. But they kind of felt unimpressive. What you think of those? My next idea was make them out of real wood, but I had no intention to pick up a saw again in this project. So my final idea was line around the whole house, frankly. The scraps of all the leather I cut out.
So I cut out some adhesive felt and glued it on a piece of cardboard as hard base. On top of that, I created 4 different patterns I thought would look nice. I used some more strands as hinges and as straps for tiny buckles. The top compartment was a little different. I made the doors the same way I did the others, but as for pattern, I decided to stamp it. I 3D printed some leaf stamps and pressed it overnight, only to find it looked really bad. Then I realized I forgot to damp the leather and freaked out because the leather changed colors when I did damp it. Luckily, it went back to its beautiful color once it dried. I used 2 more strands as fastening for these doors.
Now that the box is fully functional, I can take the time for some decorations. But I don't want anything flashy, I just want it to look nice.
I started by printing out another Daggerheart logo, only smaller, and cutting it into a template. I placed it where I wanted the design to be, brushed glue over the shape, and then sprinkled black glitter on top. After letting it dry, I brushed away the extra glitter. The final thing I did was print out some corner pieces, prime them white, paint them gold, and then dry brush them black and glue them on.
This project took way longer than it should have, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. I love this box. Let me show you.